Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. My name is Manny Jad, and I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Middle East Options. Welcome and thank you for participating in IMEO's first webinar of the year, Escalation and Deterrence, U.S.-Israeli Strikes on Iran and What Comes Next. We are meeting at a deeply consequential moment for the Middle East. The events of recent days have underscored just how fragile the regional balance remains and how quickly long-standing tensions can move from calibrated signaling to dangerous uncertainty. When the region is under pressure, clarity becomes its own form of diplomacy. That is the purpose of today's conversation. Our aim is to look beyond the immediate headlines and consider the broader strategic picture, the mechanics of what occurred, the calculations shaping decision-making in Washington, D.C., Tel Aviv, Tehran, and the Gulf, and the pathways that may lay ahead, whether toward further conflict, uneasy containment, or renewed efforts of de-escalation. At the Institute of Middle East Options, we believe that when the region is under strain, dialogue matters even more. It is through careful analysis, principled engagement, and the exchange of serious ideas that we begin to make sense of fast-moving events and their wider implications. And now let's get to the good stuff. We are very fortunate to be joined today by an outstanding group of speakers, and I want to thank them all for being with us today. And our moderator is someone who is very much part of the IMEO family, Ambassador Hesham Youssef, who is a retired Egyptian career diplomat and currently serves as senior advisor at the European Institute for Peace. He has worked extensively on conflict resolution across the Middle East, including on Arab-Israeli conflict, Iraq, and Sudan, making him the perfect facilitator for today's dialogue. Hesham, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Manny, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you all in our this important event. I've been working on conflict resolution for the last 40 years or so, and I think this is one of the most difficult times that I have witnessed in my life. And we are at an unprecedented times. We usually use this term, whether it is deserved or not, but I think it is deserved now more than ever. There is a joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran for the first time that we see something of this nature happening between the U.S. and Israel. We also have an attack on the 6 GCC countries, plus other countries as well, including Jordan, Iraq, and others. And we are seeing a situation that can go easily out of control. And we are hoping that this war would end soon. We heard President Trump saying something to that effect, but we've also heard contradicting news. As many said, we have 4 speakers talking about this issue from different perspectives, from an Iranian perspective, an American perspective, Gulf perspective, and an Israeli perspective. We will start with the 4 speakers that we have is Dr. Ali Vaez, the Iran Project Director of the International Crisis Group, Professor David Roches, Professor of the Thayer Marshall Institute, and Dr. Ori Rabinowitz, Senior Lecturer of International Relations at the Hebrew University, and last but not least, Mohammed Baharoon, the Director General of the Dubai Public Policy Research Center. We will start our discussions with some opening remarks by our 4 speakers, and then we'll go into a brief discussion, and then we will take the questions from the audience. We will start by Ali, and the questions for Ali that I hope he would address, in addition to any other remarks that he may wish to introduce, is in relation to the fact that Trump has indicated that he will not accept anything other than unconditional surrender, which was the case also during the previous war. And we know that for Iran, regime survival is at stake. And I would like Ali to tell us how he thinks this U.S. position is affecting the path of the war from an Iranian perspective, and what role the military groups allied with Iran in the region will play in relation to this conflict. We have seen intervention by Hezbollah. We have also seen Iraqi armed groups doing some attacks on U.S. interests, and so on. So, Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Hesham, for the kind introduction. It's great to be back with this group. The Iranian strategy from the beginning was, given the fact that they are outgunned in this conflict as they experienced last year, to outlast U.S. and Israel in order to stop this cycle of aggression against them. So unlike in the 12-day war, this was not a surprise for the Iranians. They were expecting another round of conflict. And they had all sorts of contingency plans in place. But the strategy really boils down to trying to stretch this conflict both in time and in space. Now, in time, it means that they would have to pace themselves out in a way that they would not run out of ammunition to be able to continue this conflict after the US and Israel would run after interceptors. That's a lesson that they learned from the 12-day war, that towards day 10 in that conflict, Iranians could hit targets in Israel much easier than was the case at the beginning of the conflict, primarily based on this calculation of depletion of interceptors. And this time around, by also expanding the geographic zone of this conflict, it would create additional stresses on ammunition availability to shoot down drones, missiles coming out of Iran. Also, by horizontal escalation, the Iranians were hoping that they would create costs, whether they're economic costs for the global economy, the energy markets, that would translate into an inflationary impact in the United States or even in Europe. And also political pressure, because then the Gulf countries would in turn put pressure on the United States to stop this conflict. Now, the last part of this calculation, I think, has backfired. And in fact, the Iranians have alienated their neighbors way more than they have pushed them to lobby Washington to stop this war. But nevertheless, on the part of putting pressure on the global economy, they have been pretty successful. We saw how the global energy market panicked yesterday with oil prices reaching $120 for a short period of time and then dropping down again to $85. Now, if you talk to Iranians, they tell you that their approach is working out pretty well, that they are still able to fire missiles. And we have seen in the past 48 hours that they have actually fired a more sophisticated ammunition like cluster munitions and missiles with warheads that are heavier than 1 ton. And all of that, despite U.S. claims that their launchers have been taken out and they're no longer able to really fire at Israel. There's a lot of hype on both sides, a lot of misinformation, a lot of psychological warfare. So it's hard to verify either side's claims. But there is one thing that is clear, which is that it will be very hard to try to stem Iranian drone attacks against the Gulf countries and against the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. As we have seen in other conflicts like in Ukraine, drone production and deployment is so much more difficult to deal with than when it gets to ballistic missiles. And the Iranians had calculated that if they were able to inflict significant harm in terms of also the casualty numbers on the US side or Israeli side, that there would be political pressure in Israel and the US to get out of this conflict. Of course, there have been American casualties, but the numbers are still pretty manageable at least from the US's perspective. So all in all, the Iranian objective is that at some point when Trump wants to do what he did last year, and there's already some evidence that he might be moving in that direction, talking about the US meeting most of its objectives, when he decides to impose a unilateral ceasefire, that the Iranians would not accept it, and they would continue the conflict until they can get ceasefire terms that are favorable to them. Now, again, I'm not defending this position. There might be a lot of wishful thinking in this approach, but this is where the thinking is. And of course, if you look at domestic repercussions of this conflict, in the selection of the supreme leader, which is the former supreme leader's son, the Iranians are sending a message of defiance to Israel and the United States, of saying that not only they didn't manage to topple the regime, that there is continuity, and there is basically the middle finger that it's still a supreme leader named Khamenei who's in charge. And also they have still a very tight grip on their domestic sphere. There have been no significant mobilization from below. Obviously the wartime circumstances do not allow people to come out, but the regime is also imposing very serious controls. There are checkpoints on the streets, and there is no sign of any kind of fracture at the level of the elite or within the security apparatus. So, the message Iranians are sending out of this whole thing is to say that they can win in this game of endurance. They are resilient enough to survive this war. And now that the US has tried everything to try to get them to capitulate, they would have to finally understand that formula does not work with Iran. Of course, it's coming at a very high price for the country and for its relations, especially with this, but that's where the Iranian mindset is at this moment.
Thank you very much, Ali. I think that would, I'm sure, raise a lot of questions, remarks. There are those who argue that the current Israeli coalition wants to be in a state of war continuously to get a better chance in winning the next election. Do you agree with that? And I would like you also to tell us how this military attack is dealt with internally in the complex internal Israeli political landscape, and how does this military attack fit within the broader Israeli strategy?
Thank you so much. So I'm going to try to tie in a few threads. Some of them will probably seem a bit conflicting, but we'll try to do our best. So generally speaking, the Israeli public as a whole accepts the argument that Iran represents an existential threat to Israel. This is mainly based on developments since October 7th. The Israelis are largely aware of the fact that the IDF found documents in Gaza indicating close collaboration in planning and funding October 7th between Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And the Israelis are very much aware of the fact that in April 2024, the biggest psychological barrier or deterrence barrier holding off a direct conflict between Israel and Iran was basically broken off when Iran launched the first wave of ballistic and drones at Israel. So again, this was Operation True Promise 1 in April 2024. And ever since then, the threat perception and the way in which the Israeli public views Iran has gone through a tremendous revision, and it's mostly accepted, generally speaking, that Iran does represent a threat. That doesn't mean that the Israeli public as a whole doesn't see also some of the political consequences, and I'm going to expand a little bit here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to reflect the way this is debated and discussed internally in the Israeli media and by Israeli pundits. So the criticism leveled against Netanyahu when voices from, let's say, more critical journalists attempt to analyze the decisions that led to the current operation, they focus on two specific avenues. First is the criticism relating to Netanyahu's calculation regarding the stability of his coalition. This is perceived by some critics as a move that may have been at least partially motivated, or an auxiliary force, if you will, by the understanding that this would help Netanyahu quiet or calm or marginalize the more right-wing elements of his quite right-wing party, so Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who automatically basically support war and offensive measures. So this helps him kind of marginalize them. Another thing that's being debated in the media is Netanyahu's indispensability narrative. By positioning himself as the leader, as a wartime leader capable of managing a multi-front existential conflict, is basically attempting to leverage the security situation to argue that he should be in charge of any kind of a new government that's being formed, and is also we're also not clear if he's going to try to trigger snap elections around June or maybe around in the summertime. It's not precedented because Israelis don't go to elections during the summer usually, but it remains to be seen. And also, it's quite clear to many pundits and observers that he wants to use the image of a victory also internally in terms of legal leverage. There's a prevailing assessment that he wants to tie a decisive military achievement in Iran, and specifically achievements relating to the Iranian nuclear program and Hezbollah, and probably the ballistic missile program as well, to provide moral and political capital necessary to bargain what we call the pardon for retirement framework. We also saw this being leveraged internally and discussed internally in the Israeli press, where some sources close to Netanyahu have indicated domestically that Netanyahu, or at least people close to Netanyahu, would like to see movement towards the resolution of his legal procedures that are pending. And there's also a commodity of what we call procedural stalling. The constant security crisis also stalls the progress of his trial. Netanyahu is facing trial and is supposed to be giving his statements and is supposed to participate in the trial, and it has been frozen. So these are different trends or different issues that are being reflected domestically, mainly by the opposition. Obviously, if you do ask people close to Netanyahu, they'll explain that his considerations were 100% motivated only by national security consideration interest, and the opposition and the critical journalists don't accept this. But I think what's important to understand is that you won't see the same kind of support for Netanyahu as you see for the war. There's actually quite a big cleavage or a divergence. So I'm going to touch on some new data from the Israel Democracy Institute and some major media polls that we saw coming out of Israel in the past couple of days. So while there is a broad public consensus, more than 60%, regarding the necessity of the current war, there's also a profound trust deficit. A lot of people, the population doesn't necessarily trust the leadership in the way that they're trying to pursue the military objective. And a significant portion of the electorate views the timing and the management of the war, of the crisis, something that may have been motivated by other considerations, those I just mentioned above. And I think one last thing to remember is that the Israeli public doesn't automatically react with a rally around the flag instinct or capacity, if you will. So yes, there will be a temporary rally around the flag effect in polls, but Israeli history shows us that it actually dissipates quite quickly. So after the June war, Netanyahu enjoyed a bump that lasted about 2 weeks, and then it completely went away, and people got back to reality and to the reality of the ongoing war since October 7th. So I don't see a specific reason for us to believe that this would be any different. The Israelis a lot of them, the majority of them, seems to still want to replace the government, and they still support the establishment of a national commission of inquiry examining the events that led to October 7th, something that Netanyahu has been vehemently attempting to block, successfully so, since basically October 8th. So I'm going to actually leave it at that. I feel like I took up my time, but these are trends that are being reflected in domestic Israeli media.
Thank you very much, Ori. We'll come back to many of these. We still have over an hour for our discussion, Dave. Okay, Mohammed. Mohammed, well, what happened to the attacks in relation to the attacks of the GCC is unprecedented. And it also varied widely. So not all attacks are the same. Did this result in varying positions in different GCC countries in relation to what is happening and what they need to do in relation to reactions and so on? And the relations between Iran and the GCC countries were moving on a constructive path before this war. But then, as a result of the war, I think the situation has dramatically changed. Some of my friends are saying we're back to square zero or even below square zero. So, what is your evaluation of the situation, not only from the perspective of the United Arab Emirates, but from the Gulf in general, and any additional remarks that you may have? Go ahead, Mohammed.
Thank you, Ambassador Hesham, and many thanks for the Institute of Middle East Options for this invitation. Let me start with this big question that is posed by this session. What is next? I think next is end of war, because all war ends at some point. So this is what should happen. A war will end. Will it end soon? Will it end later on? Is it going to end with a defeat? Is it going to end with the... every party will position the end of war as their own victory and the adversary's defeat. But what do we learn from all of this? And I think this is where we can. On the short term, what does that mean to us? I think one of the big things that came out of this experience in the Gulf is the concept of resilience. And resilience doesn't mean that you do not get hit. Resilience means that if you get hit, you get back on your feet as fast as you can. And resilience means that life goes on regardless. So people go to work, and people who sell stuff continue to sell stuff. People who buy stuff continue to buy stuff. That's how life goes on. And it is not because of our own strength, but because of the responsibility on us for the world. We need to continue working for the world. Now, on the other hand, there is also this faith in diplomacy. So on the short term, we will continue to use diplomacy as our number one option. There could be, other options, but they are not our number one. They're possibly not our number two or three. They're a last resort. And that's if there's a black swan in this war, which means that the war does not end. It actually, before it ends, it goes into a big confliction point where people will have to act differently than they're acting right now. On the medium term, I think this is a big question for us, which is what you've asked. What is the future of Iran? How would Iran emerge out of this war? Is it going to go back to what it used to be, an enemy, where countries, security architectures, alliances are built only to contain Iran? Is that where we're going to? And I think this is the most important. The second thing is that what is the dynamics that are going to govern that relationship? Is the dynamics going to be ideology? Are we going to create another Sunni, dam to contain the Shia dam? Are we going to create a new alliances that we frankly have refused in the past because they were against one country? Is war going to define who we are? Is conflicts going to be our way of looking at the future and relationship with Iran? And I think this is a tough question. It's a question nonetheless. In my view, this is not who we are. The Gulf will not become, a warmongering country just because of this incident that has happened. We might not end up to become, the big new alliances against Iran. And I think, again, the other question that we will have to deal with on the short and the medium term is, what does security architecture mean? Is it still an alliance with the US? Is the US is our biggest security umbrella that it is? Are we protected by the US? Is the US, when it takes a decision of war, takes our security in consideration, our evaluation in consideration, or does it regardless? And that is the question we're facing now. Is this our war, or it is not our war? Did we start this war? Was it based on our own security requirements and our security assessments or not? It was somebody else's security assessment that started it. And what is the implication? So again, these are the things that will. I think on the longer term, I mean, today, frankly, our idea is that the way we see Iran right now being suicidal. They have started their own or activated their own Samson's doctrine. And that is why they're not attacking the GCC. There's almost 12 countries that Iran has attacked. They're turning back into a worse version than Israel used to be during the 12 Days War, or during even since the Gaza War. So that is a problematic. And in the next 5 to 10 years, we will look at Iran possibly as the worst frenemy we have. So we will do a lot on our own security, so this does not happen again. We will be extremely cautious dealing with Iran. We will still extend the hand, but it's going to be, a very, well protected hand rather than we have done. 15 years, things might be different because we will start reconnecting with Iran. I think that is when Gen Z is going to be more in control in Iran and will take more of the shots. So that is the view I see it overall. I have one comment on this idea of existential war, Iran being an existential threat to Israel, which is, I know the perception very well, but in reality, Israel has been more of an existential threat to Iran than Iran has been an existential threat to Israel. I'll end with that. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Lots of questions and lots of food for thought, and also a remark directed to Ori, which we will get to that. It seems that Dave has joined us. Dave, we were talking about how things have evolved, and I want to ask you about the U.S. position.
Yeah.
Secretary Rubio spoke about why the war started and when, saying that Israel was going to attack, and we know that, therefore we couldn't wait until Iran attacks us and then respond. And he received a lot of criticism about that. And then we also heard more recently President Trump talking about ending the war, that is, the war is almost over, but not really over, maybe to calm down the markets and so on. So how do you see the evolution of the U.S. position, and how do you expect it to be formulated in the next few days in particular?
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I apologize I had to drop off briefly. Doha is fine. We get daily missile alerts. Some of my friends who live in more of the residential areas of town, we're just talking about how they could feel the windows rattle and things like that. But honestly, from my perspective, and a lot of people think I'm a psychopath about this, but Ramadan is more of an inconvenience for me than the missiles right now, except for the fact I was supposed to leave yesterday and couldn't because the airport is only partially operated. The actual reasons for going to war at this time, I think, are going to be debated for a long time. But I think that the main cause of this has nothing to do with what Israel was or was not going to do. I think it has to do with President Trump's rather undisciplined speaking style, and the fact that he, gets going and he just goes and he starts free riffing from the podium, and sometimes he gets in over his skis. And I think this was one of them. So when the democracy protests started happening in Iran, they were bigger than anything we've seen in a long time. And President Trump said he was going to do something to help the protesters. He was going to ensure their safety. And then I'm sure he stepped down from the podium and turned to his aides. And he doesn't strike me as a man who spends a lot of time poring over and annotating his briefing materials, and then said, okay, what have we got in the Gulf to, punish the Iranians for this or deter them from it? And by an unfortunate coincidence of coincidence, that, I believe, was the first time in 25 years that we did not have an aircraft carrier or an amphibious landing ship in the Arabian Sea. And I think he was told, well, sir, you disrupted the carrier schedule because you ordered the Gerald Ford for Venezuela operations. And we had both the Gerald Ford and the Iwo Jima off Venezuela. Usually one of those would have been in the Arabian Sea. And I think that and the fact that President Trump made a statement that he was not in a position to immediately back off or back up, and the possibility that he would be compared with, say, President Obama's red lines on Syria chemical weapon usage, I think that's the real motivation for going to war now, because all of the casus belli, the missile program, the nuclear program, human rights, depredations of the IRGC Navy against civil shipping, those have all existed for years. So that's my theory for what it's worth. So the question is, where are we at? Well, there's 4 stated objectives, and so far the administration's been pretty good on that. The first is destruction of Iran's air defense capability. This is not stated explicitly, but it's a necessary predicate for further action, because it's dealing with asymmetry in warfare, and I've written a short pamphlet on this that might be of interest. But basically, when Iran is firing $800,000 missiles, 2 $6 million missiles are fired at it. But if you destroy the air defense network, then you can drop a $25,000 bomb on the $800,000 missile. You can shift the asymmetry to your advantage. So that's the first aim. The second aim is dealing with the missile program. A lot of progress seems to have been made in this. We're starting to see targets have evolved from missile launch facilities and storage facilities towards upstream, like propellant factories and things of that nature. But the nature of missiles is that they're hard to find. Recall in the Desert Storm, we had a period of scud hunting that was almost entirely unsuccessful. And to the extent that missiles have been dispersed, they're going to be hard to find. They can be launched once, and then they have a huge signature. Once air superiority is established, then we will be able, I believe, to really dissuade it. And the launches have gone down from 300 on the first day to, it's pretty steady, about 20. The launches are not directed at military targets. We haven't seen Chinese satellite imagery of any Israeli aircraft destroyed on the ground, which is what a military missile campaign would do. So basically, the missiles are being fired mostly at neutral states. Iran has fired more missiles at the UAE than it fired at Israel. And it strikes me as harassment and interdiction. It's a sign of desperation rather than one of strength. The third objective is the nuclear program. We haven't heard anything about that since about the second day. So the facilities were originally bombed. The problem with bombing is it creates a lot of rubble, but you cannot be certain that's what the actual target was destroyed. You can assess it with aerial imagery, but if you assess, if you just rely on aerial imagery, I think, 101 people looking at the headquarters of the IRGC Asif Naval Base will look at the aerial imagery starting in 2010, and you can take a picture every year and look at it, and you would assess that the girls' school in the northeast corner is part of the naval base. There are a lot of problems you can make. And it has entered the conversation that we might land commandos around the nuclear sites and try to exfiltrate some of that enriched uranium and destroy the rest just to be certain. This is a mission that is in the U.S. military toolkit, but it's never been executed, and it's extremely, extremely difficult. Not impossible, more possible with air supremacy being established, or air superiority. And then the fourth is to punish the human rights violators. And that is an issue where we don't see a lot of coverage of it. It's usually buried in coverage of collateral damage, where a civilian target is damaged in the course of this, because the besieged, the Thurala, the police, they're distributed among the people. And this is a very, very dangerous, and the aim is to instill fear in these people and to punish the people who carried out the massacres. But the problem is, given the distribution of policing by definition is among the population, so it increases the chances for killing people that you don't want to kill, and that, of course, will impinge upon the ability in the democracy to concentrate the war, to prosecute the war. How does this end? Well, there's a couple things. First off, we've seen the threats against civilian naval vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. That threat was not a direct result of Iranian military action. It's a result of Lloyd's of London raising the shipping rates. And I've been saying for years, I think many of you have heard this, that the Iranian Navy doesn't have to defeat the U.S. Navy to achieve their goals. They just have to make insurance clerks in London nervous. Well, they have done that. But when the prices rose, what we started to see was a trend where ships would just turn off their AIS, their radar, or their location of their position. And if you look at the traffic, you won't see ships trafficking the strait. You'll see them disappearing on one side and then reappearing on the other side. I think that there will be multinational concerted action here to bring shipping through because it's an international concern. You can ask me about radars and missiles and stuff like that later. I don't want to take too much time, but I welcome your most difficult questions. Thank you, Ambassador, for your patience.
Thank you very much, Dave, and glad you were able to make it quickly. I have plenty of questions coming from our audience, so I hope you'll be brief so that we can answer as many questions as we can. I'll start with Ali. Ali, Mohammed was asking whether Iran will be an enemy or not. And there is a question that is coming through the chat as well about this issue, about the future of governance in Iran from Antonia Dimo. A question about whether what is the most likely scenario when it comes to the governance, ranging from a theocratic to authoritarian to a moderate structure. And in addition to that, do you think the regime is still in danger, or that it can be somewhat more on the stable side? Go ahead, Ali. You are muted, Ali.
Thank you, Hesham, for that question. Look, I think it's hard to predict because we don't know who and what is standing at the end of this war. It is quite possible that Mojtaba Khamenei would also be killed at the end of this war. It is also possible that some figures who have power in their hands, like Adil Larijani, the speaker, the National Security Advisor, or Mohammed Bagher, the Speaker of the Parliament, both of them former commanders of the Revolutionary Guards, might not be around. It's very hard to predict who would be around, and therefore what does that mean for the future of governance or the future of Iran's relations with the outside world. But one can think of different scenarios. One scenario is that Iran will end up where Iraq was after the first Gulf War. A wounded, weakened regime which is still in control of its domestic sphere, but is not really able to project power way beyond its borders. It will have active relations with most of its neighbors, including some of its friends in the Gulf, like countries like Qatar or even countries like Kuwait, who had a relatively friendly relationship with Iran. Oman might be an exception to that rule, but even on that front, who knows? So that's one scenario, and I think that's a pretty unstable scenario, because Iranian regime would not be able to address any of the underlying grievances of Iranian people. In fact, things from the perspective of many in Iran would go from that worse. They want to see the back of the regime. Now they've ended up with a regime that is more aggressive, and they have a younger Khamenei in place, and with deteriorating situation in terms of the economy and other environmental issues and all the other problems that they were dealing with before. So it would be unstable because there would be the risk of uprisings, and those uprisings could also be then in and of themselves causes bellais for additional attacks. Another scenario is that the US and Israel will go at eliminating the Iranian leadership to the extent that the upper ranks of the system are so thinned out that there's basically no one who would be able to hold it together. And in that scenario, you would have the country descending into civil strife, whether along ethnic or sectarian fault lines, or you would see rivalry between different IRGC generals, kind of Libya or Sudan scenario. And again, in that case, the Gulf countries would have to be concerned about the spillover of instability and radicalism and refugees, not about an aggressive Iranian regime who would target their territories. And, I don't want to be starry-eyed, but there is also potentially a scenario in which magically there will be some sort of a negotiated understanding in which there is also some political transition into some more pluralistic form of government in Iran. That government would have to start rebuilding everything from scratch, including relations with neighbors. So this is why it's just so difficult to predict what comes next, because I think the United States went into this without having a strategy for the day after. It went into this with a wish that it would create circumstances in which the Iranian people can come to the streets and take matters into their own hands. But as Dave was saying, in order to completely neutralize the repressive capacity of this regime, a very entrenched regime that is also very deeply benched, it would require the kind of destruction, the kind of civilian casualties that would make it very difficult for the country to have any kind of soft landing. And even then, you're talking about unarmed civilians who are not organized or leaderless and would have to still face up the remnants of this regime. So it's more like a mirage than anything else. Again, just to end, I think the regime for now seems to have emerged out of this pretty cohesive. It is still enabled to keep a tight grip on power. But this is not over. So we don't know what else US and Israel have up their sleeves. And it is possible that if this escalates further, we will end up in a situation that the regime will be further destabilized.
Thank you very much, Ali. I hope your answers are shorter because we have plenty of questions and little time. Let me go to Dave. Dave, there have been all kinds of criticisms about an exit strategy, and the United States is not ready with an exit strategy. And also, if you can tell us from your experience, the discussion that is going on in the US about boots on the ground. All kinds of ideas about whether this is possible or not, with the administration saying that it keeps all its options open. Dave, you have the floor.
Okay, I will be extremely short. So first off, Americans have a weird thing. Boots on the ground are infantrymen, which is what I used to be, but in the first part of my career. But they do not include special operations, which is what I was in the second part of my career. So I don't think an occupation or an invasion is in the cards because it's just politically untenable. And quite frankly, you have to have 6 months of prep for it. We don't have that. The most we could mass would be a brigade. And that's not enough to hold anything significant. So that's the first one. The second point, I'm sorry, I forgot the second point. Boots on the ground and, sorry.
Exit strategy.
Oh, exit strategy. Yeah, this is gonna drive people crazy. The exit strategy is we exit. And that's what concerns many of our Gulf neighbors. They have two nightmare scenarios. One is we smack Iran, make them angry, then leave, and they're left with an angry Iran. The second is we destroy it, leave a failed state, and they have to deal with the consequences of that. But there is going to be a divergence between the U.S. and Israel once we start talking about strategy, because I think we have two different visions. I think the Trump exit strategy is to say we've destroyed their offensive capability. They can't threaten their neighbors. They can't coerce their neighbors. We're going to back off. We're going to tighten the sanctions to the extent we can. And that will create the pressure so that when you get what you had in December and January, this time the regime can't put that down. And an Iranian regime that they choose themselves is much better, even though it only gives us 80% of what we want. It would be better than us imposing somebody. That I think is it. I think Israel has another view, and I think Israel and the United States will have a divergence there. I think Israel is much less hesitant to declare victory than we are.
Thank you very much, Dave. Ori, Mohammed was saying that, well, Israel is more of an existential threat to Iran than Iran is for Israel. So what do you think about that? And there is another question that I'd like to ask you about the level of destruction in Israel. There are all kinds of reports that, Israelis are not allowed to take videos and so on, because of security reasons. But others are saying, well, this probably is because of fear of how this would psychologically affect the population. So please, go ahead.
So I think Mohammed was absolutely correct. Israel is more of a threat because Israel is more powerful, militarily speaking and strategically speaking, and I'm very thankful that it is, because if it was the other way around, Israel wouldn't be here. The Israelis, ever since the state was established, were busy building defensive and offensive capabilities, which brought them here. I'm going to be very short. So I agree with the analysis. I probably feel differently about them from sentimental views. I'm happy this is the way. The Islamic Republic, people I think are forgetful. Calling for the elimination of Israel is a main tenet and has been a main tenet for the Islamic Republic since 1979. Up until now, Israel didn't view the continued existence of the regime as such an existential threat. And as I mentioned, following October 7th and following April 2024, this perception has now changed, and you see the Israeli war machine targeting the regime, of course, not the Iranian people. But the Israelis haven't been consistently calling for the elimination of Iran since 1979. It's vice versa. So I'm going to leave it at that. I agree with Mohammed, and I'm grateful for the fact that Israel is a greater threat at this particular juncture. Where you sit, reflects where you stand. So as to the damage, from what I gather, this is mainly to prevent the Iranians from properly targeting their missiles and the drones. The British did the same in World War II to make sure that the Germans don't really know where Werner von Braun's missiles were falling. And I think this is standard operating procedure. I know from following social media accounts that internally inside Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are explaining that Israel was basically wiped off the map. Netanyahu's house was bombed or something like that. It's not accurate. But yeah, the Israeli military definitely doesn't want to publicly broadcast information that can allow Hezbollah, which is now launching more precise missiles into Israel. There's no reason to give them targeting information. I think that one of the things we need to remember is that the Israelis are very cognizant of the fact that Trump can take an immediate off-ramp anytime he wishes to. They know who they're dealing with, psychologically speaking, as a wartime leader making decisions. And I think what we'll see now is that the Israel is trying to maximize the amount of assets and targets they can go after in Iran. So missile program, nuclear targets, if there are any left, and elite targets relating to the regime. And I think, as far as I can tell, following Israeli news, is that the observation is that this could pave the way for internal destabilization down the road, not necessarily tomorrow or next week. So this is basically shaking the foundation of the regime, hoping that eventual developments will unfold down the road. I don't think there is an expectation that something will happen by next week. And I think the Israelis the IDF at least is probably recalibrating the policy accordingly. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ori. Mohammed, there has been all kinds of expectation that as a result of the pressure put by Iran on the GCC countries, that they in turn will put pressure on the United States. And there were a number of reports indicating that the Gulf countries is sending a message to the United States that the commitments that they promised in relation to investment in the US cannot be fulfilled in their entirety at this point in time because of the war. So if you can comment on that. And the question coming from Ahmed from Bahrain, asking about whether the GCC countries should continue to rely on protection offered by the United States or to accelerate development of a more autonomous regional defense framework. So go ahead, Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Look, I spoke about this Samson's doctrine that Iran has activated. It's part of it is that if we do not exist, no one will exist. If we cannot export oil, nobody will export oil. If we cannot import stuff, nobody will import it. And yes, in their mind, this is a way for allowing or not allowing, but motivating the Gulf states to put pressure on. However, we are not the reason why the prices of oil are going up. It's the Strait of Hormuz. We are not the reason why Europe cannot get its gas from Qatar. It is because of the Strait of Hormuz. We are not the reason why stock markets have opened the way they've opened in the US. So the economy is connected. And this is where we are as Gulf countries. We're major node in that connectivity of economy. Repercussions will happen. I think in the mind of policy planners in Tehran, if the gas prices go up in the US, that's pressure enough. They think that this strategy has worked for the Saudis during the Biden administration. It could work again. And so that's raising the price of war to the US. But the price of war, it's not going to be to the US. It's going to be to everyone else. And again, it's the Chinese, it's the Japanese, it's the Koreans, it's the Indians, everyone who's their development is dependent on. So what you're referring to is not a direct consequence of pressure. It's the force majeure that has been announced by a number of Gulf countries in there. And that is definitely going to impact. And if I'm going to spend more of my income on shoring up my defenses, buying more THAAD missiles, Patriot, or whatever, then there is going to be less money going for investment outside because the priority is going to change. And I think that is, again, possibly part of the calculus. But again, this is something that we've knew. This is something that we've warned the US about even before the war. So it's not a surprise. And we have seen previously instances where military options did not deliver the strategic outcome that was hoped for. So there's two different things. Military operation can deliver a very strong military outcome. In the case of this current war, the air supremacy is an outcome. Obliteration of a lot of the missiles, launchers, and sites is an outcome. Is it a strategic outcome? That's a different issue. So that is part of it. On the US, I don't think anyone is going to say that we do not need the US as part of it. I think, and this is my personal view, there are holes in the security umbrella, but doesn't mean that we throw away the umbrella, just patch them. And I think that's exactly what we're doing. Internal production of air defense systems is a patch. Agreements with other countries, including Korea and others, is another patch. Investment in new technologies is another patch. So no one is replacing one umbrella with another, but there are going to be other patches for that type of security umbrella.
Thank you, Mohammed. Let me go back to Ali. Ali, there is a question about the role that the separatist movement can play in this war, coming from Ann Moisen from the United States. Can you elaborate on how this may impact the situation? And there are those who are asking also about secondary impact of the war. Younes Bahri from Algeria and he's saying that there are other countries that are affected as well. And I've seen all kinds of reports about Ethiopia not having enough fuel for planes, Bangladesh not having enough electricity and asking people to go on vacation, and Pakistan also asking people to work from home and so on. So what do you think about these, the issue of the Kurds and implications on other countries and how this would affect Iran?
Thanks a lot. So on the separatist groups, and not all Kurds, by the way, are separatists, but there are certainly separatists among Iranian Kurds, and as well as other minorities like the Baluchis or the Ahwazis. But the reality is that we knew over the past few months that some of these groups were being armed, including the Kurds and the Baluchis. But it does not appear that they would be able to pose, at least at this moment, a serious threat to the central government in Iran. The Kurds are about 10% of the Iranian population, and as I said, not all of them are on board with a separatist movement. And there is one thing that creates a sense of unity among all segments of Iran, of Iranian society, given the very strong sense of nationalism that exists in a country that is one of the first nation states in the world, and that's fear of disintegration of the country. And so whoever is putting these leaks out there is in fact helping the regime, because there is no way that a regime that is so detested by the majority of its people would be able to create a rally around the homeland effect in a way that news like this or President Trump's statements that Iranian map would not look the same at the end of this war would generate. Now, there's also another element to take into account, which is some of Iran's neighbors are as worried about these groups gaining control over territory than Iran is. In the case of the Kurds, Turkey is very worried and has already shared intelligence with Iran and might even intervene if it becomes necessary. There are also Iraqi militias on the Iraqi side of the border who would help the Revolutionary Guards in trying to stem these movements. And the same applies on the other side of the country, the border with Pakistan, that the Pakistanis are as much against the Baluchis being able to control territory in Iran than the Iranians are. And so they would be helping the Iranian regime as well. On the broader implications of the current pressure on the energy markets, look, that's precisely the point for the Iranians. The point is to spread the pain so that this is a regional war, and in fact, it's the international community that is panicked about the prospects of this war, so that it translates into pressure on President Trump, who does care about money, markets, and midterms. Right, and so that's where the calculus is. But how much of that really translates into this balance between short-term military objectives and sort of medium to longer-term political calculations is anyone's guess.
Thank you very much. I have two questions that I will ask Dave to take a first stab on it, and then others can also respond if they wish. One question is coming from a friend, Alistair Burt from the UK, and he's asking about what are the chances of a ground bargain in the region, indicating that each conflict paves the way for the following one. And isn't it time to get our act together and try to see whether a ground bargain can be reached in the region? And the second is a question coming from Karim Kamel about the possibility of a role for China and what would be, whether they would come to the aid of Iran in the coming period. So I'll start with you, Dave, and then anybody who's interested in contributing to that can chip in.
I love talking about a grand bargain because it allows me to talk about Fashoda, which was, when you had two competing empires bumping into each other in a at the limits of empire in Africa, and out of that came the Grande Alliance, which fought the two world wars. It was reversal, and I can tell you that studio side at Al Jazeera. One of the things we're talking about with Mujtaba becoming the supreme leader is perhaps he can be Nixon and we can be China. Somebody who is considered to be a traditional reformer probably will not have the ability to bring the Revolutionary Guard in, which is, increasingly the real power in Iran, and reinforce a grand bargain. So it's paradoxically, and this just may be my innate optimism clouding my analysis, but paradoxically, I think only a supreme leader with this background will be able to, if there is the grounds for a grand bargain, move the state that way. And what I'm hoping is that when this is all over, there'll be a reassessment and people will say, look, the threat that our external defense was built for, that threat, Saddam Hussein doesn't really exist anymore. And look what this has gotten us. Our defensive plans have actually created more errors than that. And, Trump has shown, in spite of his bombastic personality, he's shown a remarkable amount of flexibility on matters of statesmanship. I'm still astounded by how quickly he welcomed a man who had been held prisoner as a terrorist for 4 years and had a $20 million bounty on him as president of Syria, and moved to I didn't think it was possible to lift sanctions as quickly as he had. I'll leave the second question to, I think the panel knows that better than I do.
Thank you, Dave. Anybody else interested in chipping in relation to any of these two questions? If not, I'll go to additional questions.
Can I talk a little bit about the grand
Yes.
bargain?
Go ahead.
And
Okay.
I think this is in relation to my question on the existential threat, because any grand bargain will have to eliminate the existential threat. And I agree with Dave on the not only the character of President Trump, but also on his direction. He was the only one who started talking about bringing Iran to become part of the Abrahamic Accord. That is not just expanding the Abrahamic Accord. That is not just Israel winning another. It is ending that existential threat between the two arcs of instability, or the two tips of the arc of instability in the region, which is Iran and Israel. If that is done, then a lot of other stuff is going to, so we could eventually see a grand bargain. So I don't think it is extremely out of reach. However, it would require Iran and Israel to find ways to see that they are no more existential threat to each other. And I think that will require a lot of work.
Thank you, Mohammed. Ori, I'll come to you in relation to a question asked by a Jerusalemite from, her name is Doris Awad. She's asking, how is Israel using this war to reshape the approach to Palestine from the two-state solution to its broader territorial agenda, and refers to the restrictions in the West Bank and so on, and how this would affect and maybe end the relevance of the Board of Peace.
So I think this is a very important question, and thank you for asking it. There are a few detrimental developments on the ground. First of all, we see the government basically giving a green light for massive human rights violation in the West Bank and settler violence against the Palestinian population in the West Bank, with virtually no follow-up by the military or the police. And we see a huge uptick in the intensity of these attacks. And the government is basically, if not being silent on them, is virtually encouraging them. This is due to the political inclinations of politicians like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. I'm sure people who are logged onto our webinar know them, and I don't need to explain the exact political orientation of these actors. And we also see, in parallel to that, this current government trying to gear up towards the coming elections. The elections will be held at any point between, let's say, end of March and late September. We don't know exactly when they'll be held. I think that on the ground, while the Iran war is unfolding, any kind of progress relating to the Gaza peace board is virtually stalled. There's no international capital available to promote it, and everything in this respect will hinge in terms of the orientation of the Israeli government on how the elections will unfold. If Netanyahu wins and leads another right-wing coalition, I think it will be the death knell of any kind of progress towards the two-state solution. And if it's not irreversible now, it will be irreversible down the road. If another government takes shape, and it's impossible to tell who may lead such a government, then personally it is my hope that we may see some progress towards the two-state solution. I don't think it's something that will happen near term. I think we can only talk about long-term progress. Israeli public opinion isn't there quite yet, but another government with a different approach that isn't made up of the most radical right-wing elements of the Israeli parliament may be able to reinvigorate that, but again, it's anyone's guess. Currently, the polls don't really tell us who will lead any likely alternative government, and if Netanyahu manages to accrue political achievements, he may actually convince the Israeli voters that he was a successful wartime leader of the current war, so everything is still very much up in the air. I do think that the coming elections in Israel will be dramatic from any kind of perspective that you're going to inspect.
Thank you, Ori. Ali, I want to come back to you in relation to something that you said at the outset in your initial remarks about the possibility of the United States ending its military action in Iran, but that Iran feels that, no, it wants to continue to its military operations. So how realistic do you think this is in light of the situation in Iran and what this may entail as a result of actions of that nature?
Look, it all depends on whether the Iranian claim that they have kept some of their assets in their back pocket to use at the end of the conflict is true or not. We don't know that. Again, I've seen them firing missiles with cluster munitions in the past 24 to 48 hours, which demonstrates that there are still launchers left and the ability to punch through the multi-layer air defense system in Israel is still there. One of the main criticisms that existed in this 12-day war in policy circles in Iran about Iran accepting the ceasefire was that towards the end they were getting through and hitting Israel much more effectively. And therefore, that's why Israel and the US were the ones who initiated the ceasefire. Iran didn't ask for it. But the Supreme National Security Council at the time had made a prior authorization that if the US and Israel come to us with an unconditional ceasefire, whoever receives that call, and Foreign Minister Roches did, would be in a position to accept it. This time around, they want to get a written ceasefire with terms that are favorable to them. And so they are thinking that if that happens again, they're not going to accept a unilateral imposition. They want to be able to negotiate. Again, as I said in the beginning, that might be too ambitious, because even if we accept the possibility that interceptor stockpiles might be running low, the US still has tremendous offensive capacity left. So it's not like the US would be defenseless and would still be able to inflict significant harm on Iran. And so reaching the upper hand, I'm not sure if it's something that would really play out in the battlefield. But at least that's what the Iranian calculus is for the moment.
Thank you, Ali. Dave, Ali at the outset also spoke about something that is probably more problematic in this war than in many others, in relation to claims by different parties in relation to what they were able to achieve or what really happened.
Yeah.
And the misinformation and the fake news and so on, and maybe also Mohammed can chip in relation to this issue, because there were reports that the United Arab Emirates attacked water desalination plants in Iran, and so on. So how do you see this playing out in the coming few days, and how is it affecting the situation on the ground?
Yeah, I don't think it affects the situation on the ground. I think it is there's an asymmetric advantage to Iran with this, because you have Western democracies with both of whom are led by a very unpopular leaders. That 50% of the population would be against them if they announced a cure for cancer. And here you have an undeclared war. There was no popular referendum or to go to war in either of those countries. And so, we haven't seen, for example, any debris of what hit the water desalination plant in Hesham. It could have happened, it could not have happened. But, on one side, you have an open democracy where people can publicize anything without fear of it. And on the other side, you have a regime that is very, very tightly controlled about media access. So that advantage is to Iran. Whether they use it or not is up to them. And I think that it can rebound against them if they're not good about it. President Trump is doing his best to try to ignore things that he finds inconvenient. So the openness with which I spoke about how the target list will produce civilian casualties, I don't think Secretary Hesham or Secretary Trump will speak in those terms, speak with such frankness as I do about weapons effects when you target civilian police, even serial human rights civilian police. And that's not to say they're innocent. I mean, the Gestapo was civilian police in World War II. But be that as it may, those possibilities are just out there. So I think it's a net benefit for Iran in this war. I'm sorry, it's not. I have to define this. It's not a net benefit, but it is a weapon that is more effective in their hands, and the ground favors the use of the weapon by them, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, you want to say something about this misinformation or something, or?
Well, I mean, I don't have to. I mean, the UAE government have came out to say that this was not accurate, and even criticized an unnamed Israeli official for saying it to. So this information, reality is usually the first casualty of war. So this is quite, in essence, the important aspect is that the UAE has been subject to attacks in a war it didn't start. It didn't participate. So there is no retaliation against the UAE, because the UAE and all the other Gulf countries, they did not want the war. They were very clear about it right from the beginning. They told the US, you cannot use our grounds. Now, but all of these attacks give the UAE the right to retaliate. It did not retaliate yet. It can. If I would suggest a manner in which the UAE would retaliate, it's not going to be by allowing the US to hit a desalination plant. It would be through creating a coalition that would go against Iran in the same way, coalitions have acted in Libya, in Yemen, and in other places. That's the modus operandi. It's not hitting, also hitting a critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, is something that we've been complaining about Iran doing. And I don't think we would do something that would allow the Iranians to use it as a pretext. In my view, there is an intention by certain parties of the war to extend the partners of that war. And we have heard similar, indications also from Iran saying we did not hit Azerbaijan, we did not hit Turkey. Turkey did not, jump to the gun saying that a missile was targeted to Incirlik, then we would need to respond. There is a very, deliberate attempt not to expand the war when there are other attempts to actually expand the war.
Well, thank you very much, Mohammed. Now I'll do something unfair to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you mute yourself, please, Dave? Yeah, okay. I'll do something, that is difficult for all of you. Two final questions. One of them is a lightning round where you're allowed to say one or two words only, and one in which you can have 2 minutes. So you'll have 2 minutes each to respond to a question about regional security. We've been talking about regional security for a very long time, and now this war is a game changer. So I would want you to say for 2 minutes each, what do you think the shape of how we approach regional security would look like after the end of this war? And then we'll have a lightning round for 1 minute, and then we'll go to Manigat. So let's go. Let's start by Ori, and then take it from there. Ori, please go ahead.
Regional security. I think we're at a historical moment that's equivalent to the long end of the Cold War in Europe. It's too early to call, but the processes in the months to come will shape the geostrategic positions of actors in the coming decades, right? So in the Cold War, the Berlin Wall fell in late 89, and it took us to the summer of 91, and suddenly and briefly the Soviet Union fell. So I think developments in the Middle East in some cases will be very quick, in some cases it will take months or maybe years, but we're at the equivalent moment there. I can only hope that the Israel-Palestinian issue and the Israeli-Iranian issue will find some way forward and some way to mitigate the pressure, because these are certainly the two dramatic flashpoints of the region, but it's too early to call.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I think that regional security is going to be profoundly affected, but I think I'm usually brought into these four to talk about nuts and bolts. So I'm going to talk about general trends. What we saw was in the last 15 years, the GCC states started taking integrated air and missile defense extremely seriously. And we've seen a lot of progress on that, a lot of intercepts. It's always been in Israel's consciousness, but it really entered in 2010 into that. I think the next step is going to be maritime security. It is really remarkable to me that given the wealth and their reliance on sea lanes, that in every GCC state, the Navy is the least well-funded, least supported, least influential of the military services. And particularly if we start to see seaborne mines, that's an area that the region is uniquely vulnerable to, that we, for some reason, just see underinvestment. So I see that underinvestment as stopping, and I see the focus going to sea, and I see that I stopped 30 seconds early. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Ali?
Well, I was hoping I would go last so that I could criticize what everybody else said, but basically, I think the problem with the Cold War analogy is that, yes, of course, we got rid of the Soviet Union, but look at what we got now, Putin's Russia, right? Or, thinking about maritime security or air defenses, it's all dealing with symptoms of problems, not with the root cause. I think the real lesson here is that if we want to create a stable situation, it cannot be a situation in which one country is the hegemon and everybody else falls in line and are subjugated. Whether that country is Iran or is Israel, it doesn't matter. If everybody's interests and security concerns are not taken into account, we would just continue repeating these cycles, but with different names. One day Egypt is the biggest problem in the region, another day it's Iraq, another day it's Iran, another day it's Turkey, and the cycle would just go on. We have to figure out a way that is basically mutually tolerable for everyone.
Thank you, Ali. Mohammed?
I will repeat a phrase I used before, so please forgive me. There is nothing regional about this region. So talking about regional security, to me, is absurd. If you look at the people who came for the UAE's aid today, it's Ukraine, Korea, France. We haven't seen, the same type of support from other regional partners. So the security is going to be global, not regional. It's very difficult to do that today. The impact of the lack of security is on the international community or international welfare of the economy, not only our ones. So that's why it's difficult to talk about quote unquote regional. On maritime security, and I will interject with Dave. The fact that we don't have ships crossing Hormuz Strait is not Iranian missiles. It's insurance prices. So it's risk, it's not threat.
It's both. It's both.
I understand, but this is the reality is that, and that's why President Trump came in and said, I will cover he understands the insurance. He understands the psychic. So there is something that we will need to do on that, front as well. It is not all weapons and bombs.
Well, the question that is unfair to all of you. Now, I want you to look at your crystal ball and tell me since we have 1 minute, so you can have a sentence or so, when do you think this war will end? So, and I'll start with Dave.
I think it'll be the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So that's basically either early March or mid-April. I'm sorry, late March, the end of March, or the second week of April.
Ori?
Next Monday before the markets open. So a few hours before, maybe Sunday night.
Thank you, Ori. That's optimistic. Mohammed?
I think it's already ended. What we're seeing right now is the wind tail, but I think the war has already ended. Battles did not, the war ended.
Well, the US is saying that its biggest attacks did not start yet. So it depends on who you're listening to. Ali, you'll have the last word before we go to Manny.
Well, I'm hoping that it would end at some point between the end of Ramadan, which is on the 18th of this month, or the beginning of the Persian New Year, which is on the 21st.
Well, thank you very much. You didn't disappoint me. So now we have some clarity in relation to expectations as to when the war would end from the four of you. So all what remains for me is to express my deep appreciation for your participation and for your contribution. I think it was a rich panel, and we hope that we can continue this discussion in all kinds of other events. Thank you very much. And Manny, the floor is yours.
Thank you to Hesham, Mohammed, Ali, Ori, and Dave for an exceptionally thoughtful and timely discussion, and to all of you for tuning in and engaging with the dialogue. At moments of heightened uncertainty, conversations like this do matter. They help us move beyond reaction and toward deeper understanding of the choices and risks shaping the region. We look forward to continuing these conversations in various future IMEO programs, and we hope to see you soon.